Hello everyone, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Hannah if you're new here, and in today's video I'm going to be talking about the books in 2025 that I give up on. I did not finish. This covers a period of time between like midsummer through December. So I only have 13 books to talk about, but these are the ones that I decided not to finish. Way back in June, I was reading The Amulet of Samarkand by Jonathan Stroud. This is a middle grade fantasy, and I remember trying to read this as a child when this first came out and having very similar feelings. I tried rereading it again as an adult, hoping that my experience would be different, and I was like, well, everyone talks about this series. And I had the same thoughts, which is this is a really slow start and it's, very slow paced. And to me, it was kind of boring. It's a little bit of an urban fantasy story as well, which is typically not my favorite. So this was just a DNF for me at about 30%. Then a couple days later, still in June, I tried reading The Last Unicorn by Peter S. Beagle. I got like 30% into this one as well. I've read another book by this author and his writing style I just don't mesh with. So this is just not a fantasy for me. I watched the movie when I was a kid, but the way that the story is written just didn't gel with me. In July, I attempted to read The Foxhole Court by Nora Sakovic. This is a dark mafia romance disguised as this like lacrosse-like sport thing as a cover. I prefer romances that are sweeter. I've tried a mafia romance in the past before and it really didn't work for me. I'm trying things outside my comfort zone, hoping that they'll, prove me wrong, but this is one that I was like, I read about 14% of it and I was like, you know what? I can tell just from the couple scenes that I've read, this is not going to be one of those for me. Unfortunately, I only got 10% into The Bone Shard Daughter by Andrea Stewart before deciding to give this up. This is kind of on me. I should have read the synopsis a little bit closer because our main character suffers from amnesia. She got sick, and ever since that illness, she has memory loss issues, and so that's part of the main plot of this story. And I don't like amnesia plot lines. I think they're stupid. And so I was reading this, I was like, well, maybe I can push past it, but then we got to a different point of view character, and I was like, not super interested in their story either. So this is just one where I probably shouldn't have tried in the first place just based off the synopsis. So that is totally my bad. Then we have The Stone in the Skull by Elizabeth Bear, and I read 15% of it, and I honestly don't remember reading this, so oh yes, okay, now I do. I'm reading my notes. I do remember this a little bit. The world building, like the way that the story was being told was so like lore heavy that it kept me very emotionally distant from the main characters. And this was also an Indian inspired fantasy story, and not that there's nothing wrong with that. let me be clear, but I think this is written by a white author, and so I was just like, you know what, I'm not into I'm not into these characters. I think I'll choose a different fantasy written by somebody else for this type of story. Serpent and the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent. This is me really trying and give fantasy romance or romantasy like a good try, and I just don't like it, you guys. I got about 20% into this. This was very action forward, which I wasn't vibing with because like I have to care about something, and I just wasn't really invested in our main character enough to continue. This is just a really hard genre for me. Then we have The Road of Bones by Demi Winter. This is another romantasy, more focused on fantasy. So I'd say this is maybe a fantasy romance. I don't know. I got about 60% into this one. So this is a true love triangle where there's two love interests, and I was actually into that because it was a true love. I guess it's more like a love V, where you there were two male love interests that you couldn't tell which one the author was gonna choose. So I was actually into it, but then we got like more point of view characters on top of like this little trio, and I was like, I don't care about them. So yeah, and I just think romance, fantasy, romance, romantasy, whatever you want to call it, is just a really hard genre for me. I'm very hard to please in this category. I love my fantasy and I like my romance. Seldom do I like them combined. Then we have The Raven Scholar by Antonia Hodgson. I read about 20% of this book because I hated all of the characters. The prologue to this book is also 45 minutes on audio, and that is way too long for a prologue. And the prologue is not even our main character. So I was really confused when we got to chapter 1 and it was a different main character, because we literally spent so long with the prologue character. I ultimately didn't like how this story was written from a craft perspective in that way. There were other things craft-wise that I wasn't vibing with, but then I just didn't like any of the characters, including our main character, and so it was going to be really hard to get me to finish this one. So sad for me that this hyped 2025 release just didn't work. The next one is a soft DNF, meaning I put it down for now, and I do kind of want to pick this one back up, and it's House of Frank by K. Sinclair. This book just deals really heavily with grief. Our main character lost her sister a couple years prior to the start of the novel, but we do get to see the death in the prologue. And then 3 years later, our main character is fulfilling the final wishes of her sister, her like burial request. So she like has her sister's ashes and she's gonna go like give her her final rest. And I was just like, you know, I can tell this is gonna be like a kind of a cozy found family grief story, but I just couldn't handle dealing with a grief story at that time. So this was just like, I put it down for now after just like 2 chapters, but I do kind of want to pick this one up again and give it another try when I'm in a different headspace. Oh gosh, this one I don't feel bad about DNFing, and that's The Hollowed Hunt by Lois McMaster Bujold. I read 40% of this book, and this one was pretty disappointing to me because I loved the first 2 books in the world of Chalion, The Curse of Chalion, and then the second book in that series. I really loved those, and this one was so different and so boring to me. It's honestly our main character. The main character is this like really gruff person, and I just really didn't vibe with him as a lead. And then the plot of the story, like it took 40% of the book to get us to kind of what the synopsis says. So like this one was just not for me, and I'm not super kind of disappointed about that. I was hoping to love more books by this author. Just a few left. We have The Isle in the Silver Sea by Tasha Suri. Tasha Suri has been a really hit or miss author for me. I have one book by hers that I've loved, and then I've had things that were like middle of the road, and then things I really disliked. This one was another instance where I should have read the synopsis before reading it. It's a tragic fated mates story where they have to like relive the cycle of this story over and over again until they break the cycle, or you know, they die tragically. And I hate fated mates so much. I wasn't really in the mood for a tragic love story, and I'm not sure if that's the direction this was going in, but it was going to be playing with that theme, and I was just like, you know what, this was another example of a book that's just not for me. This is The Second Death of Locke. This was a slight, this one's not sapphic though, but it is a lady night story about, I don't even want to give you the synopsis, but this is a friends to lovers romance, and we only get the female point of view, the woman's perspective. Her name is Gray, and I think because we only get her perspective, it seems like really lopsided in the romantic development, and also she seems a little pathetic because of it. Like, since we can't get into his head and like see him pining, it seems very one-sided from our perspective character, and it was teetering on being like pathetic to me, just a little bit. This is also a military fantasy. I don't like military fantasy stories. I much prefer reading about rebels and like, you can have militaries, but like in the side periphery, you know. I much more like, you know, scoundrels and underdog stories. The last book I DNF'd was Swordcross by Freya Marsh. This is the second book I've DNF'd by this author. I think her writing just does not suck me in. I read about 15% of this. This is a queer Achillean romance, and I just didn't care. I just think this author and I need to break up. I've tried a couple of things and they haven't worked for me, just because I don't feel connected to her writing. So that was the quick and dirty DNFs of the last half of the year. I think I've been doing pretty well with picking books this year. I've been reading a little bit less, which is not necessarily a bad thing for me, but I've also haven't been DNFing as much, despite, you know, 13 being on this list. But I think that's a good thing. I think we're just, you know, still trying to figure out what I like. I'm trying new things all the time. It's good to get outside my comfort zone, and these ones just weren't giving what I needed them to give outside of my comfort zone. And I learned I need to be reading more synopses, even though it's by an author I'm familiar with, or the cover looks cool, or people are hyping it up. I really need to do my own synopsis deep dive and figure out if I'm actually interested in the story based on the synopsis, because that's bitten me a couple times this year and even in the past, so I need to take that lesson to heart. Are there any of these books I should give a second chance? I'm already thinking about reading The House of Frank, but are there any others on this list you think I should give a second try? I would love to know all your thoughts and feelings in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in another video of mine very soon. Bye.